Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. We're just going to give it a minute or two to let everyone dial in. We have about 100 registrants for today, so thank you so much. We're going to give folks a few moments to just come right in. All right, I can see everybody loading in. I'll just take a moment. Um, um, I feel like we need music or something playing at the beginning. Welcome, everyone. We have a bunch of folks still coming in. We expected almost 100 people, and so we're going to just wait another moment or two. I can still see people popping in, and looks like we're about halfway there. So welcome back also. We have a pretty robust agenda and some good content. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. I know some folks are still calling in, but I don't want to cut off the great conversation we're about to have. So welcome back, everyone. I'm Shelly Azen from UnHR. So nice to see everybody. It's been probably, I don't know, 4 or 5 weeks. We had a little bit of a summer vacation, I think, with competing priorities and helping to get our kids ready for school and vacations, but we're back and have a really great panel to share with you today. I read somewhere, or I heard on the news, I think last week, that we lose 41 minutes of daylight in the month of August. So hopefully you can get outside as much as you can if you enjoy the sunshine and enjoy some of this nice weather and some time with your families before the crazy season starts again. So just as a reminder, our agenda for today and every call that we have is, oops, sorry about that, is to help us all stay connected as an HR community. Being that we're remote, we wanted an opportunity to still continue to network with each other, share best practices, and stay connected as a community of HR friends. And then of course, this is happy hour, so beverages are optional. As I said, we have a great, robust panel today, and I'm going to turn the honor over to Vicki Sack from Juno Search Partners to lead our conversation.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. I'm really excited to have a great panel for us today of CHROs that Juno's been acquainted with for quite a while, and they're from different companies and different company sizes and industries. And so I think we'll have a nice variety of information to share on how their companies and they themselves individually are guiding their companies through this crazy time that we're all living in. So we have Tracy Murray Moore, the CHRO of the Reinvestment Fund. We have Eric Wohl, the CHRO from Radial, and Mary Dickerson, CHRO for DLL. And so what we're going to do is I'm going to have them each do a little bit of an introduction of themselves to share a little bit about themselves and their organization. And then we're going to go through some the panel and share some best practices and some things that they've been doing. And then we have a bunch of questions that came in from participants ahead of time. And then we'll also open up to all the participants if you have any questions that you want to chime in, or if you throughout the panel want to shoot anything in the chat box, we can interrupt and address where appropriate, but feel free to chat questions, comments as we go along. So I'm gonna tee up Eric first. Eric, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining. Can you hear me okay? Awesome. Thanks, Vicki and Shelley, for the invitation. It's nice to meet everybody. Quickly, I won't bore you with a lot of detail. You can go check my profile out on LinkedIn, but I've got now an unbelievable 3 decades of HR and consulting experience. After graduating many years ago, last century, I've got background from consumer products, high tech, telecommunications, supply chain, and consulting. And I've grown up at Pepsi and Dell and Anderson, Accenture, Dish, and now Radial, where I joined about 5 months ago as their Chief HR Officer. And I want to thank Vicki so much for her sponsorship to get me introduced. And in a little bit, I'll share my experience about onboarding in a completely virtual way in the middle of a pandemic and historic social unrest. So it's nice to meet everybody, and thank you again.
Tracy?
I'm going to mute myself. Hi, good afternoon. Thank you so much for inviting me to this panel. I've been in HR for over 20 years in different capacities. Most of it has been in nonprofit organizations where I get to bring my heart and my head to service different organizations. And I also do some consulting. I love the opportunity to be creative in my work and lend my years of HR experience to different corporations. But my love is executive coaching, where I can work with individuals, empowering them to live their best life and honor the gifts that they have. And so I've been fortunate enough to kind of diversify my experience and leverage some of my core competencies in the 20+ years of HR.
Mary?
Hello, everyone. My name is Mary Dickerson. I am the head of HR for DLL. DLL stands for De Lage Landen, and I don't know if any of you speak Dutch, but if you do, that's Dutch for the lowlands. It's a Dutch company. It's global, and we are a leasing company. So we're a vendor finance organization in 32 countries with 5,000 employees. I've been there 3 years. Similar to my colleagues, over 20 years doing what we do in some shape or form. Originally from Ireland, been in the States for 20+ years at this point, and living in the suburbs of Philly with the hubby and the 2 kids, who are oddly enough looking forward to going back to school because they're so bored. So it's funny times we're living in.
Vicki, can I just add a little bit about the reinvestment fund?
Please do.
That is exactly where I'm able to bring my heart and my head. But we are a community development investment institution, and we're committed and passionate around bringing health and well-being to underserved communities. We bring together individual investors and banks, community organizations to invest in projects that transform communities. It's an organization that, we can see where our work is really impacting in the areas of affordable housing, schools, health initiatives. And so we are, we've been around for over 20 years doing this work. And so there's never been a time such as this where this work is so important. So I wanted to mention and give my shout out to the Reinvestment Fund. And I've been with Reinvestment Fund for a little over a year and a half. And so I'm still learning and still growing and still understanding how just HR can impact organizations and communities.
Great. Thank you so much. So Eric, I'm going to get started with you. We're going to talk a little bit about virtual onboarding, orientation, training, employee engagement during the past 6 months. And I'm starting with Eric because he's got an interesting story to tell about virtually onboarding himself at the beginning of the pandemic. And I'll let Eric tell the story, but Juno sold him on moving to Philly and then had him starting in the middle of a national shutdown, pretty much. So
Mathematically,
I'll let
almost
Eric
exact
start.
to the dates. Yeah. Again, thank you, Vicki. And I want to thank Juno for their help to get me what has really been a fantastic opportunity for me personally and professionally. And for those of you who might not be familiar with Radial, Radial is a e-commerce third-party logistics company that you may not be that familiar with, but we've got about 250 small, mid-sized, and large retailers that count on us for their supply chain. Everything you drop into an electronic shopping cart. In most cases, we fulfill, we pick, we pack, we ship, we handle payment, tax and fraud, customer care, and analytics. And Radial is about 6,000 employees. We swell in our peak season in November and December to about 20,000 employees. We're about 1.1 billion in revenue. And we are part of the bpost Group, which is based in Brussels. So it's an interesting opportunity to be part of a global company with a European owner. And for me, if Vicki had told me that inside 3 weeks, I get my first introduction and go through interviews and get an offer, one, that would be incredibly fast, I would have expected. And then COVID hit at the beginning of March, and I made my last trip to Philadelphia the very first week of March to find a place to live and never made it back. So I'm not the first chief HR officer at Radial, but hope to be a long-term one. And what's been fascinating about it is, and you all are dealing with COVID like all of us, but I would say that the headline for me is this is the year or two for chief HR officers, and it's a function for us to truly step up and lead in a very different way. So for those of you that were around during 9/11, the financial crisis in a working capacity, it felt very much of a financially led crisis turnaround. And HR certainly had a role, of course, but the financial devastation was huge. Now you've got a very, very personal employee impact that affects everybody in significant ways. So I don't mean to be callous about it in any way, because this is a tragic pandemic and we are leading the world on how to not manage a pandemic, in my personal opinion. But here we are, and it's had transformative effects on every organization, large or small, public or private, regardless of location or industry. So I have onboarded completely virtually. I've met 5 people in Radial in person. My boss, the CEO, 1 person on my staff, our head of commercial sales and marketing, our head of fulfillment, and our CFO. And the other 250 people I've met have all been through Zoom or Teams or WebEx or Skype or phone calls. And interestingly enough, for me, I think it's been amazing. And that it's forced me to dive right in. There was no time. My very first week, my very first ELT staff meeting, the whole team welcomed me on board, and 30 seconds later they said, hey, we don't understand COVID. Can you come up with a policy for how we're going to handle the following 10 dimensions, including site shutdowns, potential layoffs, austerity measures? We get a health and safety strategy, and we got to figure out a corporate communication plan. I know you've been here for 2 days. Can you get back to us in a couple days? So that was my very first week. And it's been like that ever since, but it's been a tremendous opportunity. I've had a blast. I've learned a ton. Now you layer in Black Lives Matter. And today I did my first Black Lives Matter listening session with half a dozen incredibly inspiring African-American employees at Radial who told me some of the most incredible stories about what it's like to be Black in America. And I thought I knew a lot, but frankly, the more I learned, the more I realized I don't know nearly enough. And I guess I would just conclude by saying, COVID has been the great equalizer in many ways. It has forced us to really dial into our clients and our employees in a way that many organizations never had to. It's forced me to step up in a big, big way overnight. And I've learned more in 6 months than I would say I've learned in a decade. And I'm really grateful for the experience. I'm happy to share more as we go.
And Eric, I want to echo that. I think that this crisis has presented HR practitioners with the opportunity to really show empathetic leadership. dial into our EI. It also has presented us with an opportunity to bring back the human in human resources. And so I always, revel in the fact that, we are probably the first place people go in most instances, but right now it is really definitely a time in which we can show our value and show leadership in a different way, right? I know we have the analytical skills, all of those things are important, but that empathetic leadership, I think, has really found value in my organization, where we are results oriented, very smart, very process oriented, but the idea of us pausing, the idea of us being more thoughtful and intentional, more empathetic, has really shifted our culture. So I echo everything that you've said around our visibility and the importance of this department.
Yeah, thanks, Tracy.
So Tracy, while we have you on deck, how has your organization handled and shifted how you interview, onboard, orient, train, and most importantly, engage and get people feeling like part of the organization when you're not there?
Yeah. So when I started, I had the good fortune of working through what we call an immersion plan. And that plan is an opportunity for me to engage internal and external stakeholders in the organization. And this plan is 30, 60, 90 days. But for the remote environment, I've met with my onboarding managers to say we need to be more intentional about how we engage. So the immersion plan is very, very important to tying people into and building relationships with internal and external stakeholders, identifying a peer that could help them, navigate through our corporate culture, and also more frequent check-ins, to assess how staff are really doing. And that's how we've approached remote onboarding. But I also think those same behaviors are important for our staff. And so, ways in which we work traditionally are not the same. So when we started this pandemic, I identified some new norms that we should, adhere to as an organization. One I just talked about, which was leading with empathy, but the communication piece, more frequent, ways in which we can, being creative around ways in which we can engage staff. Not everyone wants to chat in the morning. So, being flexible in how we engage folks, seek opportunities to connect. And for us, silence does not mean that everything is okay. Not everyone and not everything is okay. So seek opportunities to connect with your staff that may be, out of the ordinary. We used to be able to walk around and visually see people. Well, now we Zoom in. So seek those opportunities to engage staff. The other one is to be open and engage, encourage our staff through flexibility. I know we could all talk about the enhancements to FMLA, but we have working parents at RF, and they were really struggling with childcare and being cyber teachers. And so that meant that we couldn't schedule meetings early in the morning for certain staff. We had to be flexible and schedule some meetings in the evenings. I also said, assign an accountability partner to someone who's not able to participate in the meeting. That way that, they don't feel bad about missing a crucial conversation. And so all of those norms we kind of infused in our culture as a way to kind of keep folks engaged and build, some transparency, build some cultural shifts around how we're going to operate in this new normal. So, you know, engagement, you know, you can't really tell the value of it. But when people don't show up, don't deliver, you know, that's a critical sign. So we've had some great wins around engaging our folks. A big, huge organizational shift was acknowledging and appreciating how our staff. And so that's another way in which we try to meet people where they are and ensure that, you know, we're acknowledging their efforts. And, you know, we can't, you know, walk up and, you know, and say that, but ways in which we can acknowledge and appreciate. So that's what we're doing.
There was just a comment in the chat, and I was thinking the same thing as you were talking, but the accountability partner is a great idea so people don't feel like they're missing out and not being.
Yeah, there's tremendous guilt when you're not a part of a meeting, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
What did I miss? What are people's perceptions of me for missing that meeting? And so that accountability partner connects with, you know, their peer and says, hey, you know, let's chat real quick around let me debrief you.
Yep.
And so that person, you know, doesn't feel as though they're missing a beat.
It's a great idea. Thank you. Mary, you're up. So things that you are doing for virtual onboarding, orientation, training, engagement, retention, things that are working, not working, that you've discovered during this time.
Sure. Thank you, Vicki, for the question. I think it's unprecedented times, so it leads to unprecedented actions. You know, the classic, you know, trying to drive for performance environment that most of us operate in has had to adjust this year. And I think it's hard to adjust when you had objectives, you have goals, and the world turns upside down, and what is important really changes. And I think our workforce in our company have had to redeclare several times in the last 5 months what's important. And our employees can rightly so say, I don't care, I'm exhausted. What's important is that I have a 2- and a 4-year-old screaming in my ear while I'm trying to get work done. And I think what we've tried to do in the recruiting process and in the performance management process is to be far more compassionate. Not that we were not compassionate before, but leaning into the flexibility concepts that Eric and Tracy have already spoken about has been critical. And it all starts with trust. So when I think about onboarding, training, performance management, empathy, even mental health issues, you know, the trust factor has to be high. And our leadership team has been communicating more than ever in our history in the last 5 months. And I think leadership is a void many people are feeling around what to do with my kids, what to do with, you know, when and where I wear a mask, where I go or not go, who I, you know, socialize with or don't socialize with. And leadership this year, I think, company leadership is filling a lot of that void. Not that we believe we're science experts, but we are giving our position on how to live through this time. And the role of HR has been one of compassion and kindness and exceptionally hard work. So when we've been onboarding people, and we've hired over 300 people during this time, we've been saying we'll figure it out together. Our technology tools are good, you know, like others have mentioned. And you've got to find time to socialize and do the water cooler chat in a virtual way. And we've been incorporating that into the onboarding plans. So it's, you know, not meet with Eric to learn HR, it's meet with Eric to get to know Eric and hang out. Like, you know, we're intentionally doing that. We've also pre-onboarded more than we've ever done before. So for hires at a senior level, and we've had several, we started onboarding months earlier. So in Europe, for example, we have long notice periods. So we often know someone starting months before they come on, and we've started the onboarding much earlier if they're receptive to it. So on their own dime, on their own time, when they're open to it, we've started onboarding months in advance, because they're going to walk into a storm, in a teacup or a storm, and need to ramp up really fast. So I think some of the principles that you should do probably anyway, any year, we've ramped them up. The other thing we've done is vlogs. So we never as a company did video blogs before. We had a lot of email communications, and we did town halls in person, you know, recorded. But now in this virtual land, we've got a leadership message going out via vlog every week. And we have our employees saying that they've never before felt so connected to the leadership of the company, which is an amazing thing to say when the leadership of the company is, you know, across 4 continents, and they never really saw them that often on a normal year. And now it's all video. So the use of video recordings, we've all been with tripods in our house, figuring out angles and recording, and 10 takes or 50 takes in my case, to get to a clear message that helps our employees feel the empathy and the kindness that we want them to feel right now, and that we know it's not okay, and we know that they're not okay. And these are kind of decisions and guidance we can give them. So I think that kind of generally answers your question. And I think the mental health aspect of all of this is massive. Never before in my career have I advised people to go out on mental health leave. That's obviously a very tricky line to walk to say to someone. But when you have people crying on a Monday, you know, you say it's Monday, you know, crying on a Monday, fine, Friday, we're all wiped, we're done. But if you're crying on a Monday, it's like, you know, let's talk. And we have, you know, absenteeism is up, and that puts more strain on everybody else. But you can't help others if you're not okay yourself. And I think we'd all be lying if we said we hadn't learned a lot about ourselves this year, and how we have to take care of ourselves in order to take care of others. And I personally have used tools that I always recommended to other people before. And this year I'm like, give them all to me. I need them all. And we've been promoting well-being on a Wellbeing side with lots of tools and tips and techniques to help people try to find their way to have balance. So I'll stop there, but thanks.
Yeah, no, that's important. We've been encouraging people to take days off and spend time with their, you know, if you need to take 3 hours in the middle of the day and do something with your kids, please go. It's hugely important. So the next issue I want to touch on is a lot has changed drastically in our work life, in how we work, where we work, when we work. What changes do you think will stay in the long term? Once we get to the other side of this, hopefully sooner than later, what impact do you think this has had permanently on your organization? So Eric, I'll start with you.
Yeah, great question. You know, Mary and Tracy, I would echo your sentiments. This is a wonderful opportunity for us to just dial into ourselves and our employees in ways that most organizations frankly haven't. And if your organization hasn't got a newfound appreciation for your people, hopefully now is the time where that occurs. And that's not to be taken for granted, but we're certainly experiencing that at Radial, which is an intense company. Again, one of the interesting, if there's a silver lining to the pandemic, we are up about 50% year over year in terms of our business volume. So we'll probably pick, pack, and ship approaching 1 billion orders this year for our clients. We're just a domestic business, not including Radial Europe and Asia. So it's intense for us, but we've got a newfound appreciation for how do you select and train and onboard people. So the work has changed. So when you think about a distribution center, we're a very, very small version of Amazon, if that gives you a visual, except they make in profits in a week what we make in revenue in a year. Let's just put that in context. So the challenge is, how do you bring in distribution center employees who fulfill orders yet want them to feel safe and connected? So we've had to change the way the work gets done in terms of how people enter. Stand-up meetings you take for granted now to be done in a socially distanced capacity. We're using emerging technology to practice social distancing. So everyone that works in DC wears a mask, and that can be uncomfortable in hotter environments. They all wear badges that are proximity sensors. So if I'm within 6 feet of a counterpart, our badges vibrate and light up. So we know that we have violated a rule. And we've been lucky with only 25 positive cases in 5 months and no fatalities, thank God. We've been very fortunate that our incident rate is very low, but we were very, very careful. So we shut down all of our offices including our King of Prussia headquarters, and are only now starting to finalize our gradual reopening plans. So one thing that has changed that I think will stick is radio was fairly flexible, but we're going to be that much more flexible permanently. We're not going to be Zillow that says work from home for the rest of your life, but we do intend to keep our headquarters staff leaner, and come in if you feel like it's not just legal and safe, but justified. And I don't know about you, but I feel very productive from home. I've had no choice, but here we are. And it's been refreshingly different for me because I came from a company that didn't believe in flexible work arrangements at all. So it's been a great change for me, a virtual 180. But I think that will be a lasting change for us. If you can be productive at home, we'll support that. It's a privilege. You earn it over time, but it's there for you. In our call center environment, another good example, we have about 2,500 call center agents that are aligned across clients. We've moved 75% of our agents to work at home, and we intend to maintain that as a permanent capability, where clients are now convinced it doesn't affect their customer service or net promoter scores with their customers. It's good for us, it's good for them, and it gives us a global talent pool. If you think about it, we used to have a hub and spoke model where you had to work within 50 miles of our call center. We're now working on ways to recruit call center agents anywhere in the country and learn how to onboard them and train them in a way that feels like they're very, very connected, the way Tracy and Mary have talked about. So that's an example of how things are changing. And the other thing I hope that occurs is a permanent step change in the way we think about our employees, how we recruit, how we onboard, how we train, how we communicate, how we care for them. And, you know, I come from fairly intense environments, you know, Pepsi or Dell. And I think I wouldn't say it's soft, but a little more balance and understanding around allowing employees to take care of themselves and their families, especially if you think about some of our diverse employees that have multi-generations in their families, right? Working parents, very different implications now. So those are examples of things we're doing, and we have doubled down on our mental health benefits. And I think just in general, our tone has changed. I hope it sustains. And it's part of my job to maintain that balance of focus on clients, our business performance, and our employees. And if you don't balance all three, you won't thrive.
That's great. Actually, that brought to mind Shelly Eason worked with a client this year who moved their call center remote and had such a huge success. They're keeping that model permanently. I don't know, Shelly, if you want to mention that as well. I thought that was fascinating.
Yeah, this was an organization that literally you had a 14-page attestation to sign off on if you wanted to work from home, and you had to, like, you know, take a blood test and, you know, go through FBI security. I'm being a little facetious. But then boom, over the weekend, we sent, you know, 325 people in the call center home. And now I've had regular conversations with the CEO and the vice president of that department saying, what does a good employee look like in terms of productivity? And where could they sit? Could it be in Denver? Could it be in Pittsburgh? Does it have to be in Philadelphia? And so now we're saying, what does a good productivity look like? And then how do we replicate that and give people the grace, I always say, of having to be at home and dealing with children, and how do you split shifts? And so now a company that was so structured has really done a good job of coming to the other side of the spectrum, saying anything's open for discussion now. So I'm really proud of them. Yeah, thanks, Vicki, for remembering that.
Yep, I thought that was a really good story. So Tracy, do you want to answer a similar question about some of the things that you think might stick long term?
Yeah, some of what Eric said, but for the reinvestment fund, one of the things that we've realized is that the way in which we communicated with each other, within departments or outside of departments, could definitely be enhanced. And so there's some excitement around cross collaboration, you know, really helping people lean into skills that they have or want to discover. And so I think there's a whole excitement around career development, right? And, you know, ways in which we can empower our leaders and develop our leaders, and tap into those untapped skills and competencies that they don't quite know exist. So I think that excitement will continue. The other piece is around the communication. And so it's there's a focus on frequency. There's a focus on ensuring that the communication is relevant and that the communication is inclusive. And so we're asking our leaders to get out of their comfort zone, engage people. It's easier now in a sense, that you may not typically engage. And some of the projects like PPP have enabled and fostered that type of cross collaboration, tapping people from other departments and communicating broadly. So we do our quarterly, we used to do quarterly staff meetings, but now there's, for the exec team, we meet twice a week. And so we're, ensuring that we have our fingers on the pulse of what's really most impactful and what's going on with our employees and with organization and all the other legal things that are going on. So that communication has definitely been enhanced. Our management team, we meet weekly now and not, twice a month. And so, we're deciding on what initiatives to prioritize. Some things that were on the plate at the beginning of 2020, we're now taking off the plate. And so that communication that is more immediate, I think will stay and will continue. And the other piece, along with the communication, along with the focus on career development and developing our leaders, is around creating a diverse and equitable environment. And so we've all been impacted by, what's going on in the civil unrest that's going on. But diversity for us was around training. Diversity now is so much more. It is around, having some very difficult conversations. We can no longer bury our head in the sand around, the impact or the experiences that Black and Brown people are having in the workplace. And whether it's intentional or not intentional, we've just not done a very good job of opening, allowing these conversations to exist. So DEI has changed from diversity, equity, inclusion to race, equity, inclusion at Reinvestment Fund. And so while we weren't ready to move this to the forefront of our strategic focus, it is now the forefront of our strategic focus. And we've been, tasked with creating on-the-spot opportunities for folks to engage. We hired a race expert to come in and do some, I'll call them focus groups with our Black and Brown staff, with our executive team, with our management team, with all of our staff. And those recommendations fostered an organization-wide survey. And out of the survey came some recommendations. And as a collective management team, we are now, we've addressed each of those recommendations and we're prioritizing. But along the way, we're committed to ensuring that all voices are heard. We're being very inclusive around that. So, and we're about to engage a racial equity consulting firm to help us, because we recognize that we're not equipped to handle the conversation, to build the framework that's necessary for this work. But our challenge will be, we're very smart, we're very process, results-oriented people. We have to recognize that this is a process. This race work, this shift in culture around communication and inclusivity is not a check the box initiative, or, we have to be more intentional about being thoughtful and patient with this work. And so that's a challenge. We're gonna, face it head on, but there is definitely some excitement around, shifting the way in which we work, shifting the way in which we communicate. And we are very good with our external facing initiatives and projects, but we realize that now we need to turn it in and support our staff around, and communication, inclusive engagement and all of that. So from a CHRO perspective, my list of to-dos is long. But
job security.
it's definitely that. It's definitely that. And so I'm working in the next few weeks to build my HR framework that will include initiatives for 2020, 2020 and 2021, and then socialize that, because I recognize that while some of the recommendations are HR specific, I will not be successful without the partnership of my peers. And that includes my exec team, you know, and my management team and all the staff. So I'm soliciting volunteers, you know, internal advocates to support me and the organization around these initiatives.
Thank you. There's a lot of good stuff there. Thanks, Tracy. So Mary, if you want to speak to something similar, some things that have changed that may stay, how your company has been permanently changed in the past 5 months?
Yeah, thank you. Similar to Tracy and Eric, we've been looking at our geographical footprint and our real estate footprint. You know, we're an organization which is pretty much office workers, so 98% of our workforce effectively, successfully has been working remotely for 5 months now. We've had a handful of people having to go into every office around the world for mail reasons, for some paper reasons, but very few. And we've created a project called Project Chrysalis after the evolution of the butterfly, and we're focused on the work streams of people and performance, facilities, and digital. So we're looking to digitalize everything that we learned was not digital enough or was not digital at all fast. Because even if this pandemic ends next year, hopefully, something else is going to hit. That's right. Something else is going to hit. So we need to be fully digital enabled and to stay viable and strong in business. And then our real estate footprint, you know, we've realized dedicated space in offices for individual contributor, you know, focused time is not needed as much. We surveyed our workforce and asked them, if COVID no longer existed, how many of you would want to work in the office? And 85% of them said that they'd like to work remotely 50% plus of the time. So they've given us a very clear answer on, you know what, this was one of the best things about COVID is people have found more flexibility. So we will keep that, and we will change our real estate footprint to have our offices be collaboration spaces, training spaces, networking spaces versus individual contributor spaces over time as leases come up for renewal. So our real estate footprint strategy is underway to change for the long term. And then around social inequality, racial injustice, you know, as Tracy said, you don't change hundreds of years of systemic racism in a year. And we won't. We already had a solid DEI approach, but it got ramped up like crazy, as plenty of people's did. We're very much leaning into what we call daring dialogues. So it's promoting conversations and sending out to our whole workforce about what it's like to be Black in America, what it's like to be a minority of other kinds. Last week, I interviewed an executive in our company who one of his children is non-binary from a gender perspective. So we're pushing out these daring dialogues to encourage the uncomfortable conversations that help us all to grow. Because if we don't understand our white privilege, we don't do anything about it. So we're pushing harder on that. We have always had trainings, but now we have a commitment to be an ally for inclusion. And you have to do something. You can't just say it. You have to go onto our learning platform and certify that you're doing community service of some nature related to inclusion, that you are educating yourself, and you're committed to being part of the solution and joining one of the groups that are available in our company. So we're pushing harder. We were lucky because a lot of this stuff was already in the works. And then March, April, George Floyd's murder occurred, and it's like, let's launch all like crazy. We had collateral ready to go that we were going to sprinkle out through the year, and we just pushed like crazy. So I think the conversations around discrimination have changed forever, and I'm really happy about that. I think before, people could be comfortable saying, I'm not racist, I'm a nice person. And no one ever said anyone was, you know, racist or not a nice person, but the anti-racism movement is stronger than I've ever seen before. And it's exciting times to see where that takes us. And our leadership has been more vocal than ever before. And that's been surprising to some people in our company that they're being so vocal. And I think it's refreshing, right? That people are, people have at times wanted to put their head in the sand and say, that's really terrible, but it's not my problem. I'll carry on doing my job, as opposed to, oh gosh, what should I be doing? How do I change myself to make a better environment, a better culture, and a better system? So that's underway, and I think that's a lasting change. So it's, it wasn't a pleasant time. March pandemic, April, George Floyd murder, and everything that followed. And I think the resilience and the kindness and the empathy, like people we work with now, you work with them on a different level. You're united against common enemies that was no one, the pandemic wasn't any employee's fault. So I think it changes the relationship of the employer and the employee in a really positive way. And I think that lasts. Our engagement scores are higher than last year. Our confidence in leadership are higher than last year. So it's telling you something is when you lead and you speak about uncomfortable, horrible things, about the safety of yourself, the well-being of your family, everybody connects with those things now in a way that I think is powerful. And I think that's lasting. So I do think the HR function has changed forever this year. Just
I'm
good.
going to
Really
interrupt
well said.
Vicki, your next question. I was going to say there are a couple kudos in there, Mary, for you about the accountability through community service. I want to make sure we pass that along to you. So
That's really well said, Mary.
Great
I would just add, you're right. This is a great opportunity, and I'm seeing it with my leadership team. COVID and Black Lives Matter, the beginning of a very, very significant long-term change I hope to see in this country, not just in our respective organizations. But it's been an opportunity for me and my team to work with our executive leadership team. My CEO is relatively new in role, and he's got a human capital background as a partner with McKinsey, which is unique. So he gets HR. I don't have to sell him on anything. He's just got incredibly high standards. But the very first project I jumped into, and I encourage you to think about it for your leadership team, if that's your role, is to figure out how do you improve their effectiveness, because as Mary described, everyone is watching them extremely carefully more than ever. So we focused on building our capabilities to collaborate strategically. When I joined, I got a 200-page slide deck on our strategy, and there was no slide that showed the integrated strategy for the company. And I thought, man, maybe it's in the appendix, but it wasn't there. So the first thing we worked on was a company strategy. And this is an opportunity for HR to lead, not just your CFO, for example. Secondly, I noticed that our governance was not there. How do we meet? And you heard Tracy talk about frequency and quality. We meet more often, we have far better discussions, because the third leg of this project was trust, collaboration, communication, kind of the way we work together. And COVID and social unrest has given us an opportunity for the leadership team to come together in a way they never have. And it was really a privilege to get a chance to help facilitate that growth process with the ELT, with my CEO sponsorship. So find ways to use these unbelievably weird circumstances to build organizational capabilities that normally would not be available because business is just consuming. Well, guess what? If you don't figure these things out, your business will likely struggle badly. So let's make lemonade here. And it's been wild and such an education. So I empathize with Mary and Tracy what they're doing, and we're trying to do the same things.
Great, thank you. So one last thing, you've all touched on it in small pieces in a lot of your a lot of our conversation, but how do you feel the past 6 months with the Black Lives Matter, COVID, how have they permanently changed your role as a leader within your organization, and then the role of HR in general? So Eric, do you want to start with that?
Sure. I'll start with the disclaimer that, like I said at the start, the more I think I know, the less I know. And that humility is so important. When you have a chief in your title, the expectation is you're an expert on everything. And the reality is that this is the time for leaders to be humble and curious and authentic and honest. And I will be candid with you to tell you, I'm terrified of saying the wrong thing, because I was born a white male in a middle-class suburb of St. Louis, and have had a lot of natural advantages that come with that. And I spent 2 hours today with 8 employees with my CEO in our first of a series of Black Lives Matter listening sessions. And I was just there to listen. And the stories that these employees shared were unbelievably heart-wrenching. in terms of their experience that I've never had to experience around how do I get home safely? What happens when I drive by a police officer on the highway? What happens if I wear a hoodie when I'm out for a walk or I go for a jog? When I am the only Black person in the room full of white people, how do I feel like I have to be twice as good to be perceived as equal? How do I raise my kids knowing that 1/3 of Black men end up incarcerated? Those are things I don't have to think about, at least in my personal life. So it's eye-opening and gut-wrenching, but it's inspiring to hear these stories. So I am in a position where I get a chance to exponentially increase my understanding and empathy for this, help lead a multi-billion-dollar corporation through the opportunity to become far more equitable and inclusive with a long-term strategy. It's not a fix that you just do in PowerPoint and I say, hey, by January 1, we're done. And this is not an HR initiative, right? It's the right thing to do. It's a business initiative. My CEO is the sponsor. I'm just a facilitator. And I'm excited to see where we go. But we are going to look at, as Tracy said, we know our limitations. We're hiring a good firm to help us because we don't have all the answers. We're going to invest. It's a long-term strategy. And we're going to look at our culture, our philosophy, and then we're going to look at everything about our organization structurally around our brand, how we recruit, onboard, reward, promote, build our bench, train. All these things have structural aspects that we're going to examine carefully to find out our unconscious bias. And I'm optimistic it's going to be a great unlock for our business performance with our clients, with our employees who choose to stay and feel safe expressing their point of view without repercussions. And I think our best days are ahead because we're going to really embrace diversity and inclusion the way we never have versus it's an HR initiative we have to do. So it's definitely a big shift and I'm excited for the opportunity to learn and help lead it.
Excellent. Tracy?
Yeah, a lot of what Eric said and a lot of what I've shared earlier. Again, the conversations have been eye-opening for me. As you know, I've been with the organization for a year and a half, a little over a year and a half, and hurtful for my CEO, who's been personally involved and engaged in listening. Like, you know, like Eric, we did the listening tours. And it's amazing that, you know, not just my CEO, but others are open to hearing the traumatic experiences that our Black and brown staff have had in, you know, their tenure there. You know, I wanted to caution our leadership around, you know, making excuses for the treatment or over-promising, which is what we want to do because we want to instinctively fix things. But my urging is just for us to listen and, you know, we need to do better. And that better is yet to still be defined. But along the way, we need to ask the question and be open to the positive or the negative response around how we're doing around this race work. But for me, as a African-American woman, there's only 2 minorities on the exec team in all of our 20+ years. For me, this conversation around race and experience in an all-white organization primarily has freed me in a sense, you know, where I can now comfortably share my experience, share some of my fears, share some of my hopes around changing the demographics in the organization. I didn't feel comfortable really sharing that prior to all this conversation. And so now there's more interest in understanding how does it feel to be a person of color entering an organization that's predominantly, you know, not representative of us. And so I've been asked, you know, about my experiences. So the dialogue is amazing. The vulnerability of our CEO and others has been, I think, a welcome change for our staff who may think that if you're in leadership, you have all the answers. And for our CEO and other leaders to say, I am ill-equipped to deal with this conversation. that was pretty empowering. And so I'm excited about the opportunity to shift again the culture, the conversation, how we show up as an organization internally and externally.
Thank you. Mary, how has your role changed? You've been there 3 years. Do you feel a big shift this year?
I think this year the role has become more about emotional intelligence than about, other things, and coaching people on what to say and how to say it. So words matter. And I found myself as much a communications person as a HR person this year, in finding the right words for the right message and finding my own right words and helping our leaders. And I think that's a major shift. Like, I've always considered marketing and brand management part of the HR function, but I think this year it's really, really tested those skills. My communications person on the HR team is, buried in work, because communication around pandemic and social injustice, you can't get it wrong. So I think that's not only has it been a time of resilience and more people leaning on us than ever before. When people are emotionally okay, they don't lean on us as much, and most people have not been in moments or in weeks or months. So I think the therapist, even though we're uncertified therapists, but that part of the job is amplified like crazy, and communications is amplified so much. So I think those are the big changes in the role, and they're changes for the good, because we're being leaned on more. And if we can handle the pressure of it, we'll get, leaned on into the future. So I think that's good for business, good for people.
So we're getting close to running out of time. I have a couple questions that were sent in prior to the panel from the audience. I'm just going to touch on a couple of them. Some of them have kind of been touched on in tertiary ways throughout our conversation, but there's a couple that are a little bit unique. So one question was, what types of support, such as technology or different expense allowances, are companies offering to people working from home, if any? So I don't know if any of you have allowed things like cell phone reimbursements or
we're doing a lot of
share.
Go ahead. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, we're doing a lot of different things, and it, in the crisis moments of March and April, we were just like, hey, around the world, we're like, come into the office and take whatever you want. You need a monitor, you need a chair, you don't have a desk, just take it. So there was that part at the start of the crisis, and now we're at the stage of, oh gosh, this is not ending. So now we're very much looking at the stipend situation of we're currently, it's been presented to the board on Friday. We're presenting what personas, what types of roles need what types of equipment, where do they tend to work in the future. So we've stratified our company into like 3 different types of roles that require 3 different types of enablement from a technology and equipment perspective based on their presence where. So we'll lock that in the next few weeks, and then we will identify the stipends or the reimbursement system or the provisioning. Sometimes it will be gifts from our offices. As our offices are used less, we'll just gift stuff that's there, or provide stipends. So that is underway now. And we've committed to all of our employees to give them those answers in September at the latest, to equip for a long-term period, unfortunately.
Anyone else?
Yeah, we had reasonably generous programs in place, but Mary, it's a great reminder that formalizing them a bit would be a good thing to do. So we're examining that ourselves. The vast majority of our workforce, we've arranged to work at home. Many of them are working at home periodically already, but formalizing programs, I think, is our next step. Because as you said, Mary, this is, if you want to be conservative, perhaps sticking with us through all of next year. If your hurdle is widespread, reliable, quick testing and easy access to multiple vaccines that work, right? That's a pretty tall bar to hit when you think about where we are today with widespread chaos in many, many states and cities. So if you think about it long term, hopefully it's encouraging, as you said, Mary, to think that formally. And we're trying to be as flexible as we can because employees need it and demand it and deserve it.
Yeah, we're doing the same. Although I do recognize that there's probably a need to visit the proposal that we sent out in March because of, the need for ergonomic equipment now. So, we're going to need to revisit that as we've extended our return to work date.
Great. So another question that came in was, now that we're several months into remote work, have you seen any changes in employee productivity? Anyone?
I would say in our particular case, we have seen a surprising level of employee maturity and commitment. Right? I think the fear around working from home arrangements on a broad basis for many companies, in my experience, has been fundamentally based on a lack of trust. If you give employees that type of latitude, they will inevitably take advantage of it, right? They're lazy, they're not committed, they're undisciplined. Those are all general stereotypes, and they are often unfair and inaccurate, and oftentimes placed on our earlier generation, earlier career employees, where I think they are often mislabeled as not focused, not hardworking, which is not at all true. If you give them big roles, good feedback, and support they need, they'll work harder than anybody. Our productivity is way up because our business demands it. I've been really happy with our team stepping up to unprecedented demands. So our business has a peak season from Black Friday through Christmas. We quintuple our business in 6 weeks. So it's our Super Bowl, and our retailers hire us to do it better than they can, or else they don't need us. But our peak or near peak hit in April. So now we're running a sprint within a marathon every day, and we've had to learn how to support our employees in a very different way, and our employees have responded in remarkable ways. So, we're going to continue to, as we say, think differently about the work and how we support our employees, and I hope many of these changes last. And in the world of work and what employees are looking for, how many of you now, if you were thinking about leaving your organization, would be willing to work for a company that said you have to come into the office? We don't believe really in work at home or flexibility. Like, it's a systematic shift in the way everybody thinks differently globally. So you have to step up your game to be attractive as an employer of choice. And if you can't or won't, then I think your team will suffer badly. So it's not just a nice to do, and there are tools to do it. There are ways to support employees, and I don't think you need the big brother monitoring that maybe traditional thinking might have you adopt. So extend a little trust, put the right processes in place, and I think your team will respond in spades.
We haven't seen a decrease in productivity. My concern is that staff are fearful around the future and are not taking time off. And they're not taking their PTO. We have a very generous PTO policy. So my concern is that they're burning out.
Hi, good afternoon. How are you?
And so I think that what I've messaged to our leadership team is to model the behavior that we want for our employees around that. So taking off time to replenish yourself is important. And so we've tried to message that, saying, providing flexibility to our staff, because they were just hoarding their PTO and waiting for something to happen. But I'm most concerned around their burnout, the Monday blues, which turns into Tuesday and the Wednesday blues. They're still producing because we have very high producing results orientated staff, but the burnout is what I'm concerned about. And I know we touched on mental health. I've been advocating for mental health since March, just to kind of build. And so I understand the importance of people having an outlet to share. It's not the water cooler conversations that we can have anymore, but my concern is not the productivity, it's the burnout.
Mary, did you want to add anything?
I just second the motion of not worried about productivity. People are working harder than ever, and in most cases, burnout's the biggest problem.
Yeah, and longer. The delineation between home and work is just gone. So we are almost 5 minutes past our time. I know probably some people had to drop off. Were there any pressing questions in the chat, Shelley?
Nothing else in the chat.
Okay. I want to thank everybody for coming. I want to thank our panel. This was great information, a lot of idea sharing, and a lot of good nuggets for everybody to take back. So I encourage everybody to continue these conversations in their own organizations. And hopefully we'll see you in another couple weeks at the next HR at Home.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thanks, everybody.
everyone. Thank you. Stay
Thank
well.
you. Take care. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.